how patient are you? All right, so I'm taking from the giggling and the laughter that maybe you don't consider yourselves terribly patient.
Patience is not.
Maybe impatient more than patient. Yeah, that happens. I don't think we are naturally patient. I don't think we were born patient. There was a poll that I found about patience. So they asked, I think about 1,000 people, different situations, different scenarios. How patient would you be in this situation? So the first thing was waiting for service in line, like at an office or in a store. So how many minutes could you endure standing in line? Not endure. How long could you be patient standing in line? And most people, the average was 17 minutes. 17 minutes. I'm seeing heads shaking, so that's way too short, way too long. Okay, well, the poll averaged out that people could stand in line for 17 minutes and not get too wound up. But 18 minutes, way too long, way too long. On hold on the phone. Now, for me, this is especially difficult because they play that same song over and over. Or, you know, the other places that you call and they put an ad in there every 15 seconds, and you've heard them all because you're on hold so long. You just, yeah. 9 minutes. 9 minutes before people lose it and get annoyed. Oh, well, here's something else. Back on that waiting in line, the average being 17 minutes, or about 17 minutes. Women could wait in line patiently for 18 minutes. Except Kayla. Okay, women, except Kayla, can wait in line for 18 minutes. For men, I was going to say it was 5 minutes. No, it's for men it was 15 minutes. So there's obviously a gender gap there in how long one can be patient. People in the suburbs or in the country out here are more patient than city folk. Oh, okay, we have affirmation on that. Yeah, I think that's true. So there's a wide range of people being patient. If you are normally impatient, then waiting online on the phone or standing in line at the grocery store for even 2 minutes is going to drive you nuts. And have you ever noticed, you pull up to the grocery store lanes, right? You reconnoiter, you check it out, and you go, okay, that's the one. And as soon as you get in that line, what happens? It's the slowest line. Everybody that you thought you were going to avoid over here is already out in the car, drinking their Slurpee, and yeah, it's that's the way that it works. All of these things have something in common, and that is you run down this list, and I noticed that each of these things, it doesn't have a fixed outcome, and everything is out of our control. Right? You get in line at the grocery store, you have absolutely zero control on how fast that is. You go into the post office, there could be 5 people ahead of you, there could be nobody, and you still have no control over how long everything is going to take. It's all at somebody else's mercy. And so if you're looking at that other person, they become the cause of your impatience, don't they? It's not you that's impatient, it's them causing you to be impatient. And try this one. Now, I haven't experienced this at the DMV in Idaho, but in other places, you go to the DMV and there's like 1,000 people ahead of you in line. You take your number, you sit there for several hours. You remember this boy? We went in the DMV there and you took your number and sat there and sat there and sat there. And then you get up to the counter. Now you've waited for 2 or 3, 4 days at this point. You get up to the counter and they look at your paperwork and go, oh, you have to go to that line. You know what I'm talking about? I think that's the root cause of impatience. It's not us, it's somebody else. No, clearly it's us. From the minute we're born, we are impatient, aren't we? What's the first thing you did when you were, well, you probably don't remember. But the first thing, did you say Okay, no, I don't. Oh, eat. Eat. That's not what I heard. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, we're going to cut this way short today, guys. Eat. All right, so what did I say? First thing you did when you were, you demanded something to eat. Eat. You cried. You demanded that you get your own way, that everybody pay attention to you and your needs. And if somebody ignored you, how did you react to it? Did you just go, all right, mom's clearly busy or tired or whatever, so I will just lay here quietly in my wet diaper and not. No, we demanded attention. And a lot of times, we remain at that level for the rest of our life. I have evidence of this. Have you ever pulled up to a four-way stop sign? Of course you have. And people can't get the idea of taking turns. That's the first thing that a child learns as they become old enough to process being patient. You have to take your turn. It's somebody else's turn. You have to wait. Then it's your turn. But then we get to be adults and we get in cars and trucks and we pull up and it's really whoever has the guts to pull out first. Because it's impatience is ground into us. Karma asked me why I put marshmallows on the slide today. If you didn't know, that's what those were. Those are Stay Puft marshmallows. Well, there was a very famous sociological experiment where they took children and they placed them in a room, one child at a time, and they put a marshmallow on the table in front of them. Said, now, listen, Johnny, if you will sit and not eat that marshmallow until I come back, I'll give you a second marshmallow. So, marshmallow, Johnny. The examiner closes the door and leaves the room. Bam! Johnny snarfs up that marshmallow. So forget later, the marshmallow is right here. But there were a number of children who could do it. A number of children would just sit on their hands, I think, or something, turn the other way. They had all kind of mechanisms to not acknowledge the marshmallow. They didn't see it, they weren't looking at it, they weren't thinking about it, and then the examiner came back in and bam, you had 2 marshmallows. They followed these kids in life. These were 6, 7, 8-year-olds, enough they could understand what it meant to wait. They followed these kids until later on in life, and the children who were able to wait almost always did better in life than the kids who snarfed up the marshmallow right away. That's because they learned to delay their gratification. They learned to have a number of mechanisms that they could use to be more patient. To be patient until something happened. And then there was a reward for that patience. So as they grew up, they learned that, well, I could spend all my money today, or I could save some for a greater reward down the road. Or I could do this, and then this happened later on down the road. So they were trained, or they trained themselves to be patient. Being patient is a big component of God's design for your life. Your best life is one in which you are patient, in which you can learn to wait. And if we look throughout the scriptures, there are dozens and dozens of references to being patient. You think about the very first thing that happens in the Bible, the fall of humankind. And that happens just right off the bat. God no sooner finishes creating the garden, putting people in it, than bam, they fall. But shortly after that, no more than a couple of paragraphs after the fall, God says, I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to fix this. But what God doesn't say is when, and He doesn't yet say how He's going to do it. All God says is, listen, your state is bad. You are lost now. You have a problem, and it's your fallenness. But I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to fix that. But I'm not going to tell you when it's going to happen. I'm not going to tell you how it's going to happen. I'm not going to tell you anything. You just have to trust me. Now, from that point until the New Testament comes along, we see a people who are pretty much bad at waiting, don't we? Israel is over and over and over trying to make things happen for themselves. God says, go here. They sort of go there, but they complain the whole way. Then they get there, and God says, okay, this is all going to be yours. And then they get there, and they half-heartedly, and on and on and on. They're forever being impatient with God. He gave them a promise, and they sort of half acknowledged the promise, but then they tried to do things on their own. You fast forward into the New Testament. Jesus says, I'm coming back. But he doesn't say I'm coming back tomorrow. He doesn't say I'm coming back 100 years from today. Jesus says, I'll be back. I'll be back, and that's it. So our promise is a new heavens and a new earth, an entirely new redeemed existence. But then we're told you have to wait. You have to be patient. And isn't that the hardest thing for us to do? Is to be patient. You know, when trouble comes into our life, when any kind of struggle comes our way, when difficulties are just over our head, okay, Jesus, you can come now. You can come today and get me out of this mess. Jesus, you could change my life. You could make this happen and make all these troubles go away. And yet Jesus says, I'll be back. I'll be back when it's the right time. So being patient should be a mark of who we are as Christ followers. We trust in we just sang this a minute ago. We trust in the promises of Jesus as Lord, don't we? Yes? Okay, just bob your head up and down. So we trust that. So how long can you wait for that to happen? And what's your behavior in the interim? A lot of what's happened in the church is that the church has taken Jesus' delay in returning, and it has made us passive. We build thick walls around ourselves, and we get satisfied hanging out inside the safety of the walls. We say, okay, it's comfortable in here. We got our seat where we want to sit and all this stuff, and so we just stay in here. But the trouble with that is that Jesus never says, be patient as far as sitting on your hands and watching the sky. He says, I've given you a mission, and I'll let you know when it's done. I've given you a mission. I've given you a very simple mission. Go and make disciples of all the nations. And then when I get back, you're finished with that. So until he returns, we are not finished with that. Until all the nations have heard the gospel, we're not finished with that. So our patience becomes more and more and more stretched, doesn't it? It becomes something that maybe our entire lifetime waiting, maybe our kids' lifetime, maybe our grandkids' lifetime before Jesus returns. So we might have all kinds of time that we need to mark out. Well, James speaks about that kind of patience. In chapter 5 and verse 7, he says this, be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. Now, just before that, he had talked about oppression. He had talked about troubles. He talked about bickering between ourselves. He had talked about all the difficulties that you and I deal with on a day-to-day. And he says, but be patient. Be patient. Hang in there until the Lord's coming. Don't be patient until you can't stand it anymore. Don't be patient until something happens. You be patient until Jesus returns. Period. End of story. And he says, be patient, not in terms of sitting on your hands, but be patient in continuing to accomplish the Lord's mission. Be patient in doing what God has called you to do. And he gives this wonderful example. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. He says, you too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. So he gives this agricultural example that we can understand. The farmer doesn't stand on the edge of his field just watching and hoping that something happens. and then being impatient at the end of the season when nothing happened. He's got to be active. He's got to plant at the right time for the spring rains to nourish, to cause the germination there. He's got to take care of that field during the summer. He's got to wait for that last bit of water that comes in and waters his field. It is an active patience. It is not this impatience that says, well, I put the seed in and nothing happens, so I give up. He said, no. You be like the farmer. You do what you're supposed to be doing, and there's a reward at the end of that time. If you are impatient, there is no reward. If you, it rained and there's nothing that I can harvest, well, you were impatient. If you tire out during the summer and say, well, I'm not going to take care of these plants during the summer, they're going to die. If you harvest too early, you're not going to get the full reward. So this picture that he paints covers this entire season. And it applies to everything you and I do as far as ministry, as far as what we do as our life, as a part of our life as Christians. We don't just sit and say, well, I told somebody the gospel, so I'm done. No, we keep at it, and we build relationship, and we establish new relationships, and we meet different people, and we continue to share the gospel. We continue to find different ways to share the gospel. We continue to find different ways to make those disciples that the Lord has called us to make. It's active. But we don't say, well, I gave somebody a tract, here you go, and they didn't respond, so I'm done. Or we didn't say, well, I shared the gospel once and they didn't respond to it, so I'm done. It's over. No, you continue. You show patience. And how long do you wait? You wait until the Lord returns. When Jesus returns, you are now free from all of your responsibilities as far as a follower of Christ. But until he returns, whether it be this afternoon or 4 or 5 lifetimes from now, until then, the church and you as the church as an individual, you keep moving. You keep forging forward and sharing that. But, and he throws in one little line here. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Now, he's making it sound like Jesus is just right around the corner. But he's talking in the perspective of all of history, right? How long ago was the fall in the garden? Yesterday. No, a long time ago. Longer than any of us have been alive. So we can just consider it a long, long, long time ago. Well, that's our span of history. From then until the end of the world, that's the measure of how long you are to be patient, how long you are to exercise this kind of patience. And so he's saying Jesus is near. He's right next door. He could come in any minute. That's the truth. But we are not to say, well, he's coming tomorrow or he's coming a week from now. We're simply to continue to be active until his return, until he actually returns. Meanwhile, while we're waiting, we don't become impatient with one another. We don't say, well, I tried to get along with Ken, and I just couldn't do it, so sorry, Ken, you were sitting right there. We don't do that. We don't say, well, I tried to reach out to these kids. Well, I tried to do this. Well, we did this once, and it didn't work. And no, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. We are to be infinitely patient with what we're doing and infinitely patient with one another. Remember what he said in the weeks past about humility, about the fact that you and I are to consider ourselves lower than everybody else. Our attitude is that everybody else that I see is to be lifted up above myself. I am a servant of all. And you're looking at me, you're saying, well, Pastor, that's not fair. You don't have to do it. Well, I'm not saying me, I'm saying we, I. If each of us did that, if each of us took the attitude that everybody else that we see is more important than ourselves, how well would we get along? We would get along wonderfully, wouldn't we? There would be no bickering. There would be no division. There would be no, I'm not getting my way, so I'm leaving. None of that. None of that would happen. Because I would look at everybody else and say, well, I'm your servant. I'm here for you. And you would treat me the same way. And we would never have any division. We would never have any bickering. We would never have any of that stuff. And so he takes that humility and he says, listen, while you're being patient, don't forget that humility. Don't forget that everybody else is above you. Everybody else is somebody that you can serve. And if you'll do that, you won't be caught grumbling. Well, I think he's painted a wonderful picture. I think he's given us more than an adequate picture of what it means to be patient, but he throws in one more. He throws in Job. Job, the man of patience. The man of enduring under hardship. And I think that he uses Job. He talks about the prophets as well, but Job is a picture that we can wrap our heads around because we know the struggles. We know that Job loses everything. We know that he is tempted to curse God. We know that all these things happen. And yet, Job endures. Job is patient. Job recognizes that God will act when God acts. And that's that. And there's nothing he can do to make it faster, slower. He will simply wait for God to act. And what happens at the end of Job? He is rewarded unbelievably. He is rewarded family, treasure, everything back as a reward for his patience. So James is saying there's a reward for you for your patience. And the reward is the Lord's coming again. Jesus has not abandoned us here in this world. Jesus said, I'm coming back to get you. And that's our reward. That's the perspective that we hang on to. Patience is hard. Patience is patience is a test of our patience. How's that for circular reasoning, okay? Patience is difficult, but one thing patience is not for the follower of Christ is passive. You and I cannot sit back and just let things happen. We have as our perspective eternity. We have as our perspective not just this life, not just this month, but all of eternity. That is that you and I are not going to end our lives the day that we die. We are simply going to move on into a new life. And with that as our promise, we don't look at this compressed life and say, well, I got to get my way today. I got to be impatient today because if I don't, I might die tomorrow. Well, it doesn't matter. You die tomorrow, you go on for all of eternity. In fact, all people will go on for all of eternity. It's just a matter of where they're going to spend that eternity. So while we look forward to that day, while we look forward to either Jesus returning or you and I being called home, either that, we do not sit and fold our hands and just wait for something to happen. We are active. We are to display the patience that Christians are to be known for. We are to show that first we are patient with one another. That we are not impatient with each other. That we are not grumbling, as James says it. That we are getting along and that we are intentionally loving one another. When the attitude that we display is this love of Christ, this eternal perspective, well then we celebrate this life, we celebrate the things in this life, but we celebrate it as just a temporary time. This is just temporary. This is just the time that we're spending in this world. Our eventuality is eternity. So how can you be impatient with eternity? Eternity is forever. So there's no rush. There's no, worrying about this moment, this day. None of that. Patience for you and I is us trusting in what Jesus said. There's no more than that. For us to be patient is for us to trust everything that the Lord said. While we are applying ourselves to the commands of Jesus, we are patient with the outcomes. While we apply ourselves to fellowshipping with one another, we are patient with the outcome. And when we see great success, that's a reward. That is a part of being patient. But we do not become impatient simply because things are not successful. We remain patient because we have the eternal perspective that James is talking about here. So how do we do that? Well, we do this by teaching ourselves to be patient. Now, I don't know how you go about doing this. I don't know how you work at developing your patience. But the thing that has always helped me, and it may help you, is that you take that perspective of other people being more important. You develop some measure of that humility. So whether it's the person sitting next to you right now, or the person you're going to encounter at the four-way stop sign later on this afternoon, simply say, that person is more important. And just sit there for an hour until they go. You wave at them, motion them on, whatever it takes, just to show how much you value that human. You keep doing that because remember in your mind, today is just a day. Today is a day, this year, however many years you have left in your life, whatever it is. That's just some small measure of life. Either Jesus will return or we will be called home. One of the two things will happen. So eternity rests on the other side of that. If we take eternity as our perspective, patience here in this world becomes much, much simpler. And listen, I know I gave you that marshmallow experiment about the kids, but if we learn that same lesson, if you and I can exercise that same kind of patience and not have to have everything happen like right now or today or tomorrow, we will end up doing much better in life as well. I recognize that you and I are temporal beings. I tell you all this stuff and we read the Bible, and ultimately our impatience is not going to go away this afternoon. It would be nice if we could just snap our fingers and everybody would be patient. I know that we are temporal in nature. And that is, you're watching the clock right now to see what time lunch is going to be, and you're wondering how much longer I'm going to go. Just a couple of minutes. But that's the way that we're wired. We think in terms of, okay, what's next, what's next, what's next? And if we can't get to what's next fast enough for our personal needs there, what happens? We get impatient. We get impatient. If I was to ask you to sit here quietly for 10 minutes while I went out and got a drink, you'd freak out. No, because the intention is, no, Pastor, you're supposed to finish, and then you can go get your drink of water. It's just the way that we're wired. And I recognize how difficult that is to come. You and I are going to be affected by what happens today, later this afternoon, tomorrow, what happened yesterday, whatever it is. We are time-oriented, and we're affected by the things that go on around us. And so if you are impatient with something, that's a learning opportunity. That's an opportunity for you to say, wow, I could be more patient in this situation. Maybe the next time that it happens, I will react differently. Because that's discipleship. Discipleship is not you and me gathering more facts. You have all the facts that you need. It's not us memorizing more verses. None of that. It's you and I intentionally letting the Spirit develop the character in us that best represents Jesus. That's all it is. So whatever course your individual discipleship takes, the outcome should be you become more Christ-like. And if anybody was patient in that book right there, It was Jesus, with the guys that are trailing around behind him. So every time he turns around and says to them, they go, what does that mean? Are we doing it wrong? And he is infinitely patient because he has X number of years to build these guys up. And he knows that there's an end to that. But he's not looking at that end. He's never in a hurry with them. He's never getting angry because they're not getting it. He recognizes the perspective of eternity. Jesus recognizes that whatever happens here is going to happen. And I'm going to do the best I can with these guys, and the Spirit will take over. But he's not in a rush because all of eternity lays out in front of him. And all of eternity lays out in front of us. And that needs to become our perspective. Eternity, not just today, not just 5 minutes waiting on the phone. Eternity. Because listen, the more eternity we can pull into our perspective, the more peace we're going to have in our lives. As you think about time and the need to have things happen now and things go wrong, and that makes us more impatient, that takes away our peace. That makes us less peaceful. And when we are lacking in peace, we don't want to be humble because we're busy trying to get our way, and we want our way now. And so our peace just vanishes from us. But the peace that you and I are intended to have, that shalom that you and I are intended to live our lives in, that's fed by our humility, by our patience, for our love for one another, and most importantly, from gaining that perspective of all of eternity. Not just today and tomorrow, but all of eternity. Amen?